Hi, I'm Red Mom Caitlin.
And I'm Blue Mom Shelley.
Thanks for joining us for today's episode of the Red Mom, Blue Mom podcast.
We're two moms with opposing political views who enjoy talking about politics, current events, and social issues.
We believe in the importance of dialogue to help us learn from one another, especially when we have differences of opinion. Our goal isn't necessarily to agree, but where we disagree, to keep talking.
We hope we inspire you to have real conversations on important issues with people with whom you disagree, and we hope our legislators are doing the same.
Let's get started. Hi, listeners. Thanks for joining us. Today, we are very pleased to welcome a guest on the podcast, Casper Stockham. Casper is a Republican candidate running here in Colorado for the 6th Congressional District against Representative Jason Crow, a Democrat who was elected last year in 2018. Now, I know we have many listeners who are not in Colorado, but we hope you'll stick with us today, as the issues we're discussing are things that every voter will be considering as they choose their local, state, and national candidates in 2020. Now, when I first invited Casper to join us and explained who we are here at Red Mom, Blue Mom, I told him that Blue Mom Shelley is exactly who he needs to persuade to be successful here in Colorado. Me, I'm a registered Republican, and I'll likely vote a straight party line ticket in 2020. However, Shelley's vote is highly desired by both Republicans and Democrats. She's an unaffiliated voter, a suburban mom, and she really, really, really doesn't like President Trump. Now, regular listeners to our podcast know that Shelley typically leans left. However, she has voted for Republicans in the past. In short, she is the type of voter that Casper really needs, which should make today's discussion very lively. So, Casper, welcome. Can you please introduce yourself for our listeners?
Absolutely. So, first of all, thank you for inviting me to the podcast. I think that having conversation like this is extremely important. We have to keep talking, regardless of the fact that we agree or disagree on topics. We have to keep talking. So my name is Casper Stockham. I grew up in Connecticut on the East Coast. I grew up in a very progressive liberal household. By the time I was 17, I hated all things Republican and most things white. Now, I love white people now, so get that clear. I had no problem with white people. I had no problem with anybody. I'm a Christian conservative, so I love humans, all people. So I went into the Air Force, and to make a long story short, I became very conservative in the Air Force because I started serving my country. Now, when I went in, I was not conservative, nor did I care about my country. But when you get around other people who are patriotic and, we're saying Pledge of Allegiance and we're fighting and doing all this stuff, that's supporting the country, you become very patriotic. And that caused me to become very conservative. So fast forward to 2012, I am on lists to get stuff, but I'm paying attention. So I'm not checked out of society. I'm paying attention, but I'm not interested in politics. And I get an invite from Herman Cain. He's coming into town. This is 2012. He dropped out the nomination for president on the Republican side, but he came in town. He was traveling around the entire nation holding these workshops. And he invited some folks to lunch. There was 150 of us in the room. There's probably 4 black people, including Herman Cain. And he was telling us, oh my God, this is the most important election. We have to win this election. And I'm like, dude, I am not voting for Romney. Are you kidding me? But Herman Cain tells you, you have to vote. So I gave it some thought. So I voted for Romney. We all know what happened. 10:30 our time, it was over. It wasn't even close. Right? So those things didn't make you bitter or they make you better. Well, I decided because I hadn't voted in a long time because I wasn't really impressed with either side. So I'm not a staunch Republican. I'm not a staunch Democrat. I'm a Christian constitutionalist and a conservative. I started looking around for organizations that were doing things. I got involved with some organizations that were involved in the community. And then some crazy guy came up to me and said, you need to run for Congress. And I told him, you need to get out of my face. I am not running for Congress. Dude, I don't like politicians. I don't like you, so get out of my face. But anyway, he talked to my wife and I, and he said some things that made a lot of sense, I said, well, all right. Because I had been in the community. I had worked in 5 Points for over a year. I drove from Colorado Springs to 5 Points in Denver for an entire year, every day, working in the community. So I said, this actually wouldn't be that hard to do. And now I understand running as Republican in Denver and all the other stuff. But these people knew me, right? Or I thought they knew me, and I thought they would be concerned about their community, not the R. They were not concerned about the community. They did not like the fact that I was a registered Republican. So I ran twice in Denver, lost those races, but I currently hold the record for the most votes by any Republican in that area. Also, I was able to obtain those votes and that support with very little support, matter of fact, zero support from the Republican Party, because they have given up on Denver a long time ago. It's not even on their radar screen. When they have strategy sessions, Denver doesn't even come up. I didn't get any support from the party. It was all grassroots support, Tea Party support, stuff like that. So anyway, I live in Aurora. I live over by Southlands Mall, and I've lived there for over 16 years. So I ran in Denver because you don't have to live in a district to run for federal office, but you do have to live there to serve. So had I won, I'd have to move into Denver. So anyway, when Mike Kaufman lost to Jason Crow, that opened up some opportunities potentially in CD6 for a Republican. It's my district. And I know you may be happy with what Jason Crow is doing, but I am not. And hopefully we can get into some of those things why I'm not happy. So I see an opportunity for someone like myself who can relate across the aisle, who can have conversations without getting into arguments, who can actually make a difference in the inner city community to actually step up, run, and win in CD6.
That's great. Okay, well, let's get started with some issues. Shelley and I kind of collaborated before our time here tonight, Casper. We each chose 3 issues, basically, that we wanted to talk about.
Let's do it.
These are off the cuff for you, but I'm sure these are topics that you've been thinking about.
I thrive on off the cuff.
Perfect.
Bring it.
Okay, well, then let's get started. So topic number 1 is going to be around the federal budget, spending, taxes, that kind of general topic. Shelley and I both have questions, but I'm going to get us started. Okay. So earlier this month in August, President Trump signed a budget deal. Although the deal was technically bipartisan, I'm sure you know many Republicans were critical of the deal because it doesn't do anything to reduce spending, federal spending, and in fact returns us to the $1 trillion deficits that occurred during the Obama administration. Both Shelley and I, many of your constituents, potential constituents in CD6 are very concerned about the growing national debt and what our economic future may look like. So just for the benefit of our listeners, I just wanted to share a couple numbers to kind of tee up my question. So according to the Congressional Budget Office, our federal government spent $4.1 trillion in 2018. Of that, roughly 60% is what they call mandatory spending, attributable to social programs, things like Social Security, Medicare, veterans benefits, a lot of good stuff in there, but it's a lot of money. It's important to understand that mandatory spending means just that. Funding for those programs are automatically appropriated each year. Another 7 or 8% is interest payments on our national debt, putting us at close to 70% of federal spending is either explicitly mandatory in the case of those social programs or implicitly in the case of interest on our debt, which presumably we have to pay. Put differently, every year when our Congress representatives engage in a budget discussion, they're only focused on about 30% of what the federal government is spending. 70% of that spending is essentially on autopilot. I think that's irresponsible. I think Shelley shares that view, and terrible stewardship of our tax dollars. So my question for you, Casper, is are you equally concerned with growing spending at the federal level? And what would you specifically do about it and our growing national debt?
Sure. So I am appalled by the debt that our elected officials are putting us into, Republican and Democrat. They've been doing it for a long time. This is nothing new, and Donald Trump didn't start it. This has been going on for a long time. And I would not be signing off on any of these budget deals because they are not balancing the budget. If I have to balance my budget at home, then doggone it, DC needs to balance the budget as well. And if they can't do that, then we need to hire somebody who can. I'm not one that will just say, well, it's the way it is. It's 70% mandatory. Well, who made it mandatory? Okay, we need to look at all of this. So I, personally, what I would do is I'd have a outside organization like Six Sigma organization come into the federal government and do a top to bottom review of everything we're spending money on. And I would almost guarantee you that half or more than half of the money we're spending is not being spent properly. Now, I'm just a single congressperson. I can't make that happen, but that's what I would want to happen. And until they started doing stuff like that, we're never going to fix our budget problem.
Casper, this is Blue Mom Shelley, and I agree with you on balancing the budget and that the spending in the federal government is absurd.
Sure.
You mentioned that at certain points in your career, you felt like there wasn't anyone conservative enough for you. You're talking to someone who's conservative enough fiscally that I also don't think either party represents me on this issue.
Right.
But I want to drill down a little more about taxes.
Sure.
I was appalled at President Trump's tax bill, which was to so-called lower taxes, when it actually added maybe a couple $100 per year to paychecks of the middle class, while creating massive, massive tax breaks for the ultra rich. Specifically, in that law was huge breaks for people who make all of their money from investing and do not work. So I thought this was an insult to middle-class Americans. It also ended up doubling the deficit, which Republicans are supposed to be against doing. And so I would actually support a Republican candidate who proposed significantly lowering taxes for the middle class. In my lifetime, I have never seen a Republican actually serious about significantly lowering taxes. It's a platform that Republicans get to run on, and I find that they don't actually do it. You know, by significantly, I mean, 10% for the middle class or more in federal taxes. Yeah. If you're for reducing taxes, please be more specific on how you would do this for the middle class.
Yeah. So some of the things you said I would challenge or push back on. I can't say that they're wrong because I don't have the numbers in front of me. But the tax cuts that came out did lower the tax rate for over 80+% of the people, of the working people. Now,
but it lowered it a few $100s a year.
Yeah. It lowered it over $1,200 for the average family a year. A few $100, it's not chump change to people that are struggling, from day to day. Now, what it didn't do is didn't make those tax cuts permanent. I would totally agree with that. And it did make the tax cuts for the businesses permanent. I would have made both of those tax cuts permanent. I would agree that Republicans aren't, really lowering taxes for the average person anyway. But guess what? The Democrats are always raising taxes. So you can't have one without the other, right? Republicans say they're going to lower it and don't. And the Democrats say they're going to raise it and they do.
Right, but if you're for balancing the budget, then how do we justify these massive breaks that he gave to the ultra wealthy, and that is companies that are
those breaks
excluded people who are working.
Well, I've never gone to work for a poor person. Poor people don't create jobs. Wealthy people create jobs, and they also have yachts, and they also go on expensive vacations and travel around the world. But they also have businesses that hire people. Small businesses in our country are the backbone of business. These are the mom and pop businesses that hire 5 to 10 people. They are on a very slim margin on their profit. So when you start to affect those profits with regulations and stuff, that a lot of times the Democrats put in those regulations to hurt small business. So we have to be careful of all of these things.
I agree with you to prioritize small businesses, but Trump's tax cut did not help small businesses. It helped mega.
I disagree because I'm an HR consultant as well, with all the other stuff that I do, and I talk to small businesses all the time. And again, those tax cuts did help businesses, not every business and not every situation, because if you want to help all businesses, my tax cut would be a flat tax, 10% done, no write-offs, no special loopholes up and down, just 10%. Everybody pays 10%. Now, if you have a household income of $20,000, $30,000 or less, you pay 0 taxes. Everybody else pays 10% and we're done. But they'll never do that, Shelley. They'll never do it because there are too many special interests going on.
Would you propose it?
Yeah, I propose it's not going to go anywhere because, again, they're never going to do it. And there is huge money in the tax system. We're not we're not a part of that. Okay. But that's not a Democrat or Republican thing. That's the way it is. If you know how to take advantage of the tax codes and stuff, you win. If you don't know the tax codes, you lose. I was talking to this person just the other day, and she was complaining about the Trump tax cuts. This lady is in business. Her and her husband own a restaurant. And I said, well, you need to actually fire your CPA. Because if they can't get you lower taxes with the new tax program that Trump Republicans put in, then you need a new CPA. Because my CPA saved me money. I'm a small business owner as well. Okay, I don't have any employees. I'm just a small business with no employees, and I save money.
I've heard multiple conservative CPAs say this is the worst tax law that's ever passed in our lifetimes.
Okay, well, we'll have to agree to disagree on that because I have not heard that.
Thank you, Casper. That's I appreciate the flat tax idea. I think that's a good specific answer to our question.
Shelley, I just wanted to chime in on a couple things. And Casper, just so you know, Shelley and I have had this kind of tax conversation before. We've done a full episode on it a couple months ago, so it's certainly a recurring topic. I just wanted to touch on two things before maybe we move on to our next topic. The first is, and I think, Shelley, you just referenced this a few times, this concept of taxing more on the quote-unquote ultra-wealthy.
Yeah.
My first question is always, how do we define that? And Shelley, I'm not looking for you to answer that. Well, and if you look at IRS data, and this is a number that I always think is interesting, it was surprising to me when I learned it. IRS data, if we look at 2016, which I think was the latest available, top 10% of income earners in the U.S., what do you think that salary threshold is?
Top 10%, I'd say $500,000 a year.
What's your guess, Shelley?
200,000?
Just under 140,000.
Wow.
So think about a family, right? Where you've got maybe a one person in the family is a teacher, a tenured teacher making, pretty good money. We could talk about teacher salaries separately. Other person's maybe a small business owner. They are probably well over that combined filing of 140,000. Right. That's top 10%, right? So to your point,
I don't feel
wealthy.
I don't feel like I'm in the top 10%.
No, and you've got candidates like Bill de Blasio, right?
Yeah.
His big thing at the most recent Democratic debates was, what was he saying? Tax the hell out of wealthy people.
Yeah.
No one thought to ask him, how do you define wealthy people?
How do you find it? Yeah.
But again, let's say we use a threshold of maybe $500,000.
Yeah.
That's a lot of small business owners in that bucket. I'm not saying they're not doing well, but is that the group that we want to quote tax the hell out of?
Right.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
The only correction I'd make there is that Trump's Tax Cuts and Jobs Act did not affect the small businesses that you two were just referring to. It affected very large, multi-million-dollar income businesses that specifically make money not from working, but from investments. Okay, let me ask you our next question, Casper. This has to do with voting rights. I think voting rights is one of the more important issues right now because there are various state legislatures who have implemented new rules and restrictions impacting things like voter registration limits, reducing registration drives, requiring a photo ID to vote, certain kinds of photo ID, making it more difficult to register once you've moved, purging election rolls of voters who missed a recent election. And for example, Florida voters passed a measure giving ex-cons the right to vote, but the legislature then passed a law restricting it to those who have paid back their restitution expenses, which means most of them can't register. So there's a lot of laws with respect to people who have been incarcerated and voting. Now, the original Voting Rights Act of 1965 required that states obtain federal approval prior to implementing laws like these. But a 2013 Supreme Court decision eviscerated the Voting Rights Act requirement as such. And so following that, in some states, for example, North Carolina, you may have heard, passed a series of voting restrictions that a federal court found specifically targeted African Americans. Several other states have passed these same types of voting restrictions: Arkansas, Missouri, North Dakota, Indiana, Georgia, Ohio, Alabama, Kansas, Mississippi, South Carolina, Texas, Wisconsin. I haven't heard that this has been a serious issue in Colorado, but it's a serious federal issue because these laws have particularly affected African American and Hispanic voters, and I think it's a targeted effort on behalf of Republican legislatures to reduce the amount of minority voters who are likely to vote, because a lot of them do vote Democrat. So as a Republican, what is your perspective on protecting the rights of all Americans to vote? And specifically, would you support restoring the Voting Rights Act or some other similar legislation?
Okay, I would fight for any legislation that was targeting anybody. I don't care if you're black, white, green, blue, gay, straight, whatever, if stopping somebody from voting. I personally don't need any additional voting rights acts. I'm black, but I am just as much an American as anybody else that was born here. I was born here. So I don't need a special right to give me the right to vote. I have the right to vote. I had the same rights as you, Shelley. Same rights. They can't take it away. What you're saying is you're putting black people in a category to where they need to be taken care of and so forth, and they don't. They're just as free. Hold on, they're just as free, just as now. What they don't have a lot of access to are to funding and things like that. But I'm just as free to walk up and down the street and vote when I need to vote. And if somebody stopped me, I pull out my camera. Everybody goes around the camera. I'd film it, and then I'd be on channels 4 News tonight.
Well, these laws that I'm speaking of may not on their face specifically target minority voters, but they have the end result of preventing, twice as many minority voters from voting as white voters. It's not that I'm suggesting that any minority should have any special right to vote. I'm suggesting they should have the same rights I have. So, for example,
I do. So tell me, how do I not have the same right as you to vote?
Well, the restrictions I'm speaking of are voter registration restrictions when you've moved or if you've missed voting in election.
Okay, so only black people move and
well, there's some
everybody
studies,
moves, right?
We'll post an article on Red Mom Blue Mom. There's some studies that show that these particular and voter ID laws, these particular registration.
So black people can't get IDs?
These particular registration laws affect minority voters twice as much as white voters.
How, Shelley?
For example, requiring an ID that people who live in public housing maybe don't have. There are a significant amount of minority voters who don't have a.
In order to go to the liquor store to buy liquor, you have to have an ID. You have to have an ID to buy cigarettes.
I'm talking about laws that tell you that only certain kinds of IDs work. So someone might have a public housing ID, but they maybe don't have a driver's license.
No,
and so they're being turned away at the polls.
If that exists, I would fight that. Okay, but
those are the type of laws I'm referring to.
But they don't exist here in Colorado. But I'm saying once I get to Congress, and I hope I get your vote to get to Congress, I would fight any law that said that if somebody had an ID card, now if they had to have a specific ID to vote, and the black people in the inner city couldn't get that ID, then I would be fighting that tooth and nail.
Well, that's one of the examples.
Okay, well, if it's happening, then I'd fight it. I'd be standing right alongside whoever else is fighting it, and I don't care what letters behind their name. If they're Democrat, Republican, I don't care. I know in Colorado it's not the case, but in other states, I don't know what's going on in other states. But once I get to the federal government, if there's some senator or congressperson that brings it up and says, I need some sponsors on this bill because they're not allowing blacks who live in the inner city and only have an IBT ID to vote.
Well, that's what the Voting Rights Act did. It's not that it gave special rights. What it did is it made a requirement that the federal government has to approve these types of restrictions because, prior to 1965, states were passing, the poll tax or the literacy test. On their face, they're not discriminatory, but in practice, they are.
I would fight any of those issues.
And so would you support reinstating the Voting Rights Act?
I'd have to look at the language of it because the devil's in the details. But I'm telling you, overall, I would support any effort to make sure no one is denied the right to vote. If they're American citizen, they have the right to vote. Even ex-cons have the right to vote. After they've served their time and they're out and free or whatever, and by the way, Trump put in a Second Chance Act that is doing that. I don't know if you saw that or not, but he's doing that across the nation. Thousands of people are being freed from prison, black and Hispanic people being freed from prison by Trump. Obama freed hundreds. Trump is freeing thousands.
It's Caitlin. Shelley, can I ask you, because you in your intro or kickoff question there, you listed off a number of things, including the voter ID, which we were just chatting about. Which of those in your mind is kind of most egregious or most concerning as you think about your concerns around potential voter discrimination? Because I think you said you believe that Republicans are purposely doing this. They're purposely targeting minorities. Obviously, from Casper's response, I think he would
I disagree.
Challenge that seriously.
Yeah.
Which of these do you think are most impactful? Which one are you most concerned about?
Well, these are on their face a lot of little laws. Election day should be a national holiday. In the last election, I saw lines going around the block in certain African American communities in North Carolina. Yeah,
but Shelley, they don't want people to vote. Do you understand this? I'm not talking about Republicans. I'm talking about the whole system. The less of us that are voting, the better for them.
Well, that's what I think people in the Republican Party may be.
It's not just Republican. See,
all of these
where
laws
we differ.
that I'm referring to were passed by Republican legislatures in the states.
Okay.
So things like, Caitlin, to answer your question, voter ID laws, having same-day registration, available, basically making it easier to register and vote, whether you've moved, regardless of where you live, regardless of what kind of ID you carry. It should be easier to vote, not harder. And so when states pass these little laws that sound innocuous and then they result in double the amount of minority voters being affected by them, that's the problem in my view. So what the Voting Rights Act did is it made, the federal government have to approve these little laws. That is no longer taking place.
Yeah, and I would add, there was some legislation, in fact, it was the first bill proposed by the Democratic House earlier this year, H.R. 1. I don't think any of us have the language in front of us, so no issues there. But Shelley, as you talk about trying to maybe re-engage the federal government and what their role is in making determination around voter laws, there is some language in that H.R. 1, which I think has passed the House but not passed the Senate. For
hopefully it won't get past the Senate. Hopefully it won't get signed by President.
H.R. 1 is a beast. It's like 800
it's
pages.
Horrible.
It's terrible in a lot of ways, but one of the things that it does is it completely eliminates the right of states to implement things like voter ID, which in my view, I think voting is a right, but it's also a privilege. And I think maintaining, lawful, accurate voting and election rules and all of that is one of the most important things that is the role of government. And so having the federal government come in and tell a state like Colorado or any other state, hey, sorry, you can't require an ID to vote, that's just as concerning to me, I think, as some of the issues that maybe you're thinking about, Shelley.
Yeah, and I think we've got a history in this country of states restricting voters.
Yeah, we also have a history of the federal government doing more than what they're supposed to be doing.
I agree with you there, but on voting, we have a strong history of states discriminating and
but not Colorado. And I'm running
voting.
in Colorado, 6th Congressional District, by the way, running against Jason Crow.
Understood.
All right, let's move on to our next topic, which is illegal immigration.
Oh, all right.
This is a big one. Casper, as you know, President Trump and many in his administration are under regular fire by Democrats about the topic of illegal immigration. And earlier this summer, your opponent, Jason Crow, was very vocal regarding concerns about conditions within ICE detention centers, including the one that's here in our district in Aurora, Colorado. And Crow has generally been critical of Trump, kind of aligning his talking points and position with his Democrat colleagues. I'm interested to know from you, Casper, if President Trump has taken any action in terms of illegal immigration policy so far in his term that you disagree with.
I don't know about the day-to-day because I'm not following that close. But the overall things that he's trying to do, I think, have been phenomenal. And I'll tell you why. Because everything that he's talking about doing right now are things that Barack Obama, Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer all said on video, by the way, 10 years ago, 8 years ago, 6 years ago. They all said what he is doing. Okay, so what he's doing is not anything different. We have a crisis at the border, but it's not the crisis that people are talking about. You talk about separating children from the border. Well, Trump is not even doing that. Barack Obama did it. The cages were built under the Obama administration, not the Trump administration. But then there was so much backlash that he stopped doing it. So now, just 2 days ago, he said, you know what? We are going to keep the families together. And they, oh my God, you can't do that to the children. What? I thought you want the children to be with the parents, right? So there's about 30% of those children are not the children of the people that they're with. So we need more time to figure out what's going on. So we just keep, all right, it's a family unit. Great. You guys go on over here. You're going to get 3 square meals a day. You're going to be in a very comfortable location. You're going to get fun time, video games, which, by the way, they probably didn't have where they were coming from. They're going to get all the comforts of the U.S. without being let loose into the interior while we figure out what's going on. That is the most humane way to handle that particular situation. This whole immigration issue is such a wedge issue, and both sides are taking advantage of it for fundraising. Jason Crow is fundraising off of the children at the border. Republicans also fundraise to build a wall, right? So everybody's making money from the immigration problem, and nobody's solving it, by the way. The solution is very simple. We need to fix our legal immigration system to improve it, because right now it takes 10, 20 years or whatever, and tens of thousands of dollars to become a legal citizen in the United States. It shouldn't cost that much. It shouldn't be it should be tough, but not tough to where somebody couldn't do it legally. And we need to have secure borders, wall, fence, or whatever. And they all said 10 years ago they wanted a fence. They wanted border security. Now they don't because Trump wants it. We should have a a secure border. And then we should make everybody that's here illegally, we should say, look, if you want to stay, here's what you need to do. You need to go and get in line behind everybody else that did it legally, and you need to get a sponsor. Find a sponsor, a person that's already here that's a U.S. citizen, or a company, or somebody that's going to take care of you while you're here. If you have that, you're good. No problem. If you don't have that, then you're going to need to go home.
But you realize there's no, besides certain lottery visas, almost no legal way to immigrate at this point.
That's not true.
Other than certain
That's not true at all.
high-level business visas.
That's not true at all.
I think
now,
it is true.
No, that's not true. It's tough, and it needs to be improved. That's what I'm saying. The legal
there's
system.
no line to get in. So if you're, for
There
example,
is a-
from Mexico,
Shelley, there is a line. I know
no
plenty
line.
of Hispanic people and people from Africa, African. They are in line right now
Which type of immigration do you think they're applying for?
to become a naturalized citizen of the United States.
Based on what?
Based on what?
There's no basis unless you're getting married or you've won the lottery green card from certain countries, which is only available in certain countries and in very small amounts.
in all the white countries, not the black countries, right?
No, I think it's mixed, but there's
Okay.
none go to Mexico, for example.
Okay.
This idea that there is, Caitlin and I have talked about this before, she was also surprised to learn that there's virtually no legal way to immigrate to the United States right now. So this idea that they should have stood in line and they didn't, I think is inaccurate. So yeah, I think that's a common misconception amongst conservatives. There's no line.
I'd have to see that.
No one's dodging
I don't.
the,
I'm not saying what you're saying is not true. I'd have to see that.
yeah, that's an important thing that I would hope that all of our legislators would research, because that's a common misconception. Are you saying that you don't disagree with the family separation that was taking place under President Trump in the last couple of years at the border?
Well, first of all, Obama did way more family separations, and nobody had any problem with
Do you
him
disagree
separating.
with it, though?
Let me finish, because he did a lot more, and I guarantee you, not one Democrat had any problem with Obama separating children at the border. Trump came in and started doing the same policy that Obama did, and it was a huge issue. So
Do you
I
think
had
it's
a
okay or not? Because I don't care who does it, but
Okay.
I think it's
So-
a terrible thing to do.
I think sex trafficking is also terrible. I think raping women and children at the border is terrible. And I think that drug cartels are using children at the border right now for those things.
Well, I understand those are the
So
top.
how do we know who's who, Shelley, when they come? They don't come across with papers. They're not coming across with documentation, IDs or nothing. They say, I'm Julio, I'm Juan, okay, and I'm his son. He's my son, she's my daughter. How do we know who's who?
So ACLU came out with a report just earlier in August. So there were about 2,600 immigrant children separated from their parents or caregivers. Out of that, the only ones that are left, and that was through October of last year, they said that there's now been another maybe 300 to 400. But out of that initial 2,600, there are only 120 children left. 50 are with parents who were removed from the U.S. by the government, and 70 whose parents are still in the U.S. So you had 2,600 roughly. The majority of them have been processed, and they are now currently, according to the ACLU, certainly not a conservative news source, 120 children. That was as of October.
Yeah.
So my question is,
Am I okay with
not the few examples of potential fraud that you're talking about. Is it okay that we have torn apart, if it's that many children from their parents for extended amounts of time? We're talking pulling a 3-year-old away from her parent for 8 months, 9 months.
Well, the way you explain it, it's so horrible to pull somebody out of the arm, the screaming child out of the arms of the mother, and that's not what's happening. We're trying to figure out who's who. Now, the system is broken, has been broken for a long time. Trump didn't break it. The laws, Shelley, have been wrote by Congress.
I'm just asking you if you think it's wrong to pull these kids away from their parents for an extended period.
What is wrong is us not to know what's going on. If you want to be humane, we have to figure out what's going on. Okay, now, some of them are being separated from their parents, Shelley, but some of them are being separated from drug trafficking cartels. Is that okay to leave them with the drug cartel?
I don't think there's been any actual evidence of that.
There is tons of evidence. 30% of the kids that are currently being brought across the border, 30% are being brought across by drug trafficking cartels. 30%. And we don't know who's who because they're not coming across with papers.
Well, and this is Caitlin. The piece that I struggle with is that I think, of course, it's a complex issue.
Yeah.
I think data is kind of hard to come by
Yeah,
to get accurate
very hard
numbers,
to come
but
by.
there is definitely a group of what they call UACs, unaccompanied alien children or illegal children. Then you have these children that are coming across with adults. They may or may not be their parents.
Right.
But for me, I get upset as a conservative, especially when the finger pointing is at Trump and his administration around, the U.S. government is ripping children from their parents. First of all, I don't think that that's a fair description. And
It's not.
second of all, let's take Shelley at her word that it is very difficult or nearly impossible to immigrate to the U.S. legally. Let's just take that as fact.
Yeah.
That does not give you the right to then
It does
cross
not.
the border illegally. So this puts the U.S. in a very difficult position. This puts our brave men and women in the Border Patrol and in customs enforcement and in government at all levels in a very difficult position where you're trying to humanely manage a crisis, but you have to follow law and order. So I feel badly for kids that are separated from their parents if in fact those adults are their parents, of course I have sympathy there. But it doesn't mean that we just catch and release. It doesn't mean that we let them free. I don't know what the solution is.
That's not humane
other than
either.
fixing the laws, which,
That's not
Casper, to
humane
your
either.
point, is Congress's role, and they have not done that for years.
Congress writes the law, and Congress's laws are what Trump is using to operate under, and he's trying to figure out how to do it humanely under the laws that are currently there, and the laws are jacked up. They were put into place, by the way, by Clinton, and carried forth into the Bush and carried forward into Obama.
In terms of law and order, I'm wondering if you would support this type of procedure to address the problem instead of, punishing families and vilifying immigrants. What about just enforcing the immigration laws
E-Verify?
against employers? Yes, apparently even more than E-Verify.
I'd
Because
be 100% supportive of that.
so why not focus on that? Why isn't our,
Good question. I'm not in office. Why is a crow now faced?
Because obviously people come because they know they can get a job here. It's employers who are hiring people.
So you're asking the wrong person,
if you end the
Shelley. Ask Jason Crow, who's in Congress, and he's protesting the ICE detention center. He's wasting your money and my money by doing that instead of doing, like you say, let's go after what we can solve, like E-Verify for the businesses to make it less attractive for people to risk their lives and their families' lives running across the border.
Exactly. Well, the Republicans aren't doing that either. I think
Nobody's doing it. That's my point. Nobody's doing it, including the guy you voted for.
Yeah, I think there is blame to be placed on both sides of the aisle, Democrat and Republican in Congress. This has been a decades-long problem in the making, exacerbated by, I think, a variety of factors. Asylum claims, I read a report, we talked about asylum as kind of one of the legal ways to get into the U.S., although I think many folks are abusing that because, like you said, Shelley, it's very narrowly defined in terms of what constitutes or qualifies, rather, for asylum. Yeah. But there was a report I read that said typically during the 2000s, there were about 40 or 50,000 applications for asylum each year. In 2017, there were 260,000 applications. So that asylum path that many are taking is obviously becoming known among these communities. People trying to get
they're being taught,
but they're getting refused because they don't meet the criteria.
They're being taught, and there have been some sitting Congress people who have gone down to Mexico and spent money to teach them how to come to the U.S. And then they say, look, just when you get to the border, so they used to run from the Border Patrol. They used to try to sneak in the middle of the night and whatever. Now they do it in the middle of the day, and they look for Border Patrol because they show up and say, asylum, boom. And then now they're into the asylum system.
Triggers a whole
It
process.
triggers a whole process, right? So that's all broken. The way that the whole situation is broken, but it's not going to be fixed by Jason Crow or the Democrats or the Republicans because they're making money.
Yeah, and the last thing, this is Caitlin, the last thing I would say, I think one of the reasons why I get frustrated, I guess, to put it nicely, with this whole family separation discussion is that, again, let's say it's 2,000 or 2,600 kids that have been impacted. Obviously, as we just said, not all of those kids are still in that situation, thankfully. There are 2.5 million homeless children in the U.S., and there is so much attention and focus on these illegal immigrant children. And again, I have sympathy for them. I want them to be treated humanely. Of course, I don't want them, quote unquote, ripped out of the arms of their parents. But the reality is, and Shelley, you and I have talked about this before on other issues as well, veterans and things like that, we have a lot of problems in our own country. So I wish there was as much focus on homeless children, on veterans issues, things like that, as there were on, 2,500 immigrant children. And I care about their well-being, but there are bigger problems, I think, that we face as a country that I think deserve equal focus.
Let me ask you another question that comes from some of your priorities listed on your website. Education is one of them. It's
yes.
one of, you mentioned once you have 4 E's, including economy. Education is one of them. I agree with you that education is a priority. Specifically, I think that we ought to have more and more Americans getting a college education. Yet with tuition prices skyrocketing as they have, it seems that fewer poor Americans or even middle-class Americans are able to go. Would you support any efforts to provide some sort of reduced cost or free college for those who want to go to college but can't afford it?
There's a lot of moving pieces to that. I believe the reason why college is so expensive right now is because of government. When the government took over the student loan industry, the prices went up. Student loans were not as expensive as they are right now because the government is running that system. So what we should be doing is making sure that student is following their purpose and their passion. It may not be going to college. It may be a trade, but we need to find out. We need to start. When I was in school, in high school, you ladies are too young for this, but when I was in high school, we had print shop, machine shop, wood shop, auto shop, all these different shops. And you got to chance to touch and feel and make stuff and find out if that's what you wanted to do. Right?
Well, it's not the governments, right, that are driving up the cost of tuition. I'm not talking about loans right now. I'm talking about both private and public schools, state-supported schools and private schools around the country are, have tuition at a price that is not affordable to more and more people.
I agree. The answer is not giving everybody free college, because college is not necessarily a good destination. You can go to college and spend 4 years in college and then be homeless in the street because what you went to school for.
So I'm talking about whether it's vocational, university, education beyond high school that I think everyone should have the opportunity to have.
I think if that's what your passion and purpose is, then I agree. So I can tell you right now, if I run across a student that wants to go to college or go into the trades, I can help them personally right now. I'm not even a congressperson. I can help them do that right now. There are programs and organizations and all scholarships and all kinds of things that are available to students. Matter of fact, I believe there's more of those things available than there are kids that actually want to go to college.
So I strongly disagree with you. There are tons of people right here in our district who can't afford CU, can't afford CSU, can't afford Mines, and really want to go and have merit.
I agree.
And there are not enough scholarships to send them.
No, not to those institutions, no. Because they're run by people you support and the cost is too high and the government's involved.
Where would you send them to school?
They can go to CCA or CCD. They can go to some of the community colleges and get just as good of an education without the
bachelor's degree. They can't get a bachelor's or a master's degree. So they can only use that degree
so they start out,
go to a certain point in their life.
Yeah. So they start out there and then they work. So when I was younger, and maybe when you ladies were younger and stuff, I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. So just sending somebody off to college is not setting them up for success. It could be setting them up for failure. We don't want to just automatically make that something that they do. We want to be able to make sure that's the path they need to be on.
But I'm referring to people who really want to go, and I think that it's a tragedy.
Bring them to me. Tell them to call me. My number's on the card.
And you're going to send them to school.
I'll make sure they get in school.
Okay, listeners, I hope you make sure you're sending your college-age kids over to Casper's office.
I can help them out.
He can help them with tuition.
Yeah.
So this is Caitlin, and our listeners know I like the data points and facts on some of these things. So I just wanted to share a couple things. Shelley, you had mentioned that you think it's important, I'm paraphrasing you, that we should send even more kids to college. In fact, we've had historically high enrollment in college. According to an organization called the National Center for Education Statistics. I don't know if they're partisan or not. They report that we've had a record high level of what they call, quote, recent high school completers enrolling in college, almost 70%, highest it's ever been, as well as a record high level of students from low income households, just a little bit less at about 67%.
Yeah.
And that's looking at some averages. So I think you do have a lot of students that are making it into college. But Casper, I think your point just now about some kids going to college, and certainly not everybody, but I agree that there are students that come out of high school, there's an expectation either from their community or their family
Parents.
or what have you, that they go right into a four-year college. They're not always successful. And Shelley, we've talked about this before. The data proves that. According to the New York Times, an article a couple of years ago, 30% of students, only 30% graduate in 4 years, and 40% of kids at a traditional four-year school, they don't graduate even after 6 years, and that's full-time students. So I think there's a balance here of making it affordable, making it accessible for kids that really want to do it, that know what they want to do, they have the merit, the grades to do it. But a lot of kids don't need that. They're not ready for four-year college, come out of high school. And so how do you balance that?
Yeah. I want to put a shameless plug in for an organization that I'm very familiar with called Master's Apprentice. Master's Apprentice helps underserved youth, troubled youth in the inner city get connected with the trades. They have an 8-week course. And they take these youth through this course. Some of these youth are gang members and homeless kids and foster kids, all this stuff, right? Age is about 16 to about 28. Take them through this 8-week course. Before the 8 weeks is done, right around the 7th week, they have 3 to 4 job offers, not interviews, to where they got to put on a suit and tie, offers. They sit there with the little cards and they say, I don't know, maybe this one, this has good benefit, right? 3 to 4 job offers. Starting out, minimum $25 an hour, minimum. Most of them get $35 an hour and a truck and benefits, right? So my point is that we need more organizations like that to reach out to the youth to find out what you want to do. I would have loved to have an organization be around in the school in a counseling area, when I'm talking to the counselor and say, look, Casper, what do you want to do? What is your passion? What's your purpose? Now, I didn't know at 17. My passion and purpose at 17 was girls. That was it. That's all I did. Right? But my point is that most kids are like that. They don't know. They have no idea. So sending them off and making sure that they get free college and putting them in a situation where they're probably going to fail is not the right thing to do. Now, if they want to go to college, I want them to be able to go to college, whether they have the money or not. I want them to have that. So I believe that there are resources, and if there aren't, then we need to have more resources, but not a blanket free college for everybody, because that doesn't automatically put you in a position for success. All it does is potentially put you in the same situation we're at high schools right now. So high school education is free, right? And in Denver and in Aurora, in the public school system, the graduation rate is low. Matter of fact, it's embarrassingly low, and that's free. So what do you think the rate's going to be when we have free college? It's going to be like that or worse.
Well, again, I'm talking about people who really want to go to college.
Okay, well, they really want to go to college. Have them call me. Have them call me if they really want to go.
Yeah, this is Caitlin. I agree with the idea of having some skin in the game. I think the other element of education and, the cost and accessibility on all those different things, I think there needs to be more responsibility on both sides. And I mean that from a student perspective. I think if you're coming out of a high school here in the Denver metro area, you've got your heart set on CU Boulder, but you don't know what you want to do. And you end up graduating 4 years from now with a degree in gender studies. I don't even know if Boulder offers that. It seems like something that Boulder would.
I'm sure they do.
But you got to make smart choices as a student, right? Is it worth $100,000-$200,000 of college debt coming out of CU Boulder for a sociology degree or a gender studies degree? Probably not. That's a decision that the student needs to have more responsibility. Likewise, I think there's responsibility, and Shelley, we've talked about this, on the part of the institutions, right? CU Boulder, they don't care if you're coming in and getting a mechanical engineering degree or gender studies. Right. It's the same cost to them. So we talk about skin in the game, which I think is important for students, but it's equally important on the institutional side. And that is a big change, I think, in how colleges and universities operate. But I think that's a big problem, right? CU
And
Boulder, they don't care what you graduate with. They don't care if you're employed in a year, 5 years, 10
And
years.
there's nothing about free
Doesn't
college.
matter to them.
Yeah, there's nothing about free college that would ensure that the children or children or the young adults are actually doing what they should be doing, which is learning that particular profession or whatever it is.
Sure. Well, there's no free college, or I was asking about free or reduced cost for people who can't afford it but want to go.
Yeah, I'm all for free and reduced. I like it.
I don't like it. Not if I'm having to pay for it. I don't want to be using my tax dollars to pay for some kid getting a sociology degree up at CU Boulder. That's not something I'm interested in.
Yeah, I agree.
I have kind of a libertarian viewpoint on that. I think if that individual, be it a student or whomever, they're ultimately getting the benefit of that college degree in that example, they need to have skin in the game. They need to bear the brunt of that expense and make sure it makes sense for them and that they see the value in it. I think you make it free, it completely eliminates the value, so to speak, of that
takes the value
student's
away.
efforts. And so that's what I worry about.
Sure.
All of us sitting here at the table had a much easier time than kids do today on this issue. I worked my way through college, and the cost of CU was significantly less than it is now.
Yeah.
It's near impossible now to pay for it yourself, working a part-time job.
I agree.
So
let's just make it free then, right?
That's the problem. Well, I was asking if you had any ideas.
Yeah, I do. I just
Federal
gave them to you.
legislature.
Just gave it to you.
Well, I think you said for the students to call you and you'll help them find resources. I don't know that those resources are out there.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a complex issue. The last thing I would say, and just to pick on Elizabeth Warren, since she's one of the front runners of the Democratic race for 2020 on the presidential side, her own self-published tax return. She brought home $400,000 from Harvard as a professor last year. Now, Harvard's private. I get it. It's an elite, Ivy League kind of place.
Sure.
But when you're paying professors, potentially several $100,000 a year, or when you're the University of Michigan, so University of Michigan, like most schools, they're really focused on diversity and inclusion and safe spaces and all that stuff that Casper and I probably think are nonsense. They have 100 full-time diversity officers at University of Michigan.
Yeah.
100 full-time. Total cost of that staff, as you think about salaries and benefits and vacation days, office space, all those different things, $11 million a year to support a staff of 100 diversity offers.
Oh, yeah.
Does University of Michigan need 100 diversity offers? Do students and their parents
They
need
do.
to be paying tuition
They
to
got some
cover
needy.
that?
They got needy kids there.
I guess so.
Those kids are just jacked up, and their parents jacked them up.
I guess so. I'm not going to denigrate all University of Michigan students, but I think that's another element as well, right? It's a complex issue.
and
There needs to be ownership on all sides of it.
Let me just say this,
I-
Shelley. So Master's Apprentice, by the way, is free to the youth, and they get a stipend when they go to this, right? So I do believe in resources being made available, but these kids have skin in the game. Okay, they're not just going there just to get a degree so they can say, "Hey, mom and dad, I got a degree." Their end game is to have a good paying job so they can support their families, right? So I am for those type of things. I am not just for a blanket, just pay their way into that without the skin in the game.
That end game is exactly the type of student that I'm referring to. Someone who really wants to go to school but can't afford it. I think that we want, as Americans, we want more people to go to college. We want to be a more educated country, and to suggest that that's not an important thing, I think, is wrong.
I have never said that college is not important, and one day I'm going to make sure I get another degree. But in the meantime, I want to make sure that I'm not so interested in kids just going to college. I want them to go to learn a specific college, have a specific degree if that's what their purpose is. But I don't want them to just go willy-nilly into college just because society says it's a good thing to do, because society is wrong sometimes. We don't want to just force kids into that. I want to make sure they're going into the right profession, into one that's really they're passionate about.
That's what they want too.
Okay, good. So we're on the same page.
All right, Casper, next topic. Thanks
Yes.
for hanging in here with us.
Yep.
Let's move on to gun violence. So this is another complex issue, like many of those which we've already talked about today. I'd like to focus our conversation on two elements of the topic, red flag laws and expanding background checks, both of which have been in the news since the most recent tragic shootings in El Paso and Dayton. And then obviously we had the STEM Highlands Ranch shooting earlier this summer here in our district. Let me set up both topics very quickly for our listeners. So our Colorado listeners already know that our state passed a new red flag law earlier this year that'll take effect January 1st, 2020. Shelley and I did a full episode on this topic with guest Laura Carno. I'd encourage our listeners to check it out if they want more details than perhaps we'll get into right now. Many other states also already have red flag laws, and the conversation right now at the national level has been whether or not to create a federal version of that.
Yeah.
Now, background checks, including this concept of, quote, universal background checks, is another possible solution that often comes up, especially after mass shootings. Many states already have universal background checks, including Colorado. We passed them in 2013. Mm-hmm. In the aftermath of the Texas and Ohio shootings, Trump, Mitch McConnell, several other high-profile Republicans have voiced support for, quote, expanding background checks. However, as always, the devil's in the details in terms of what that actually means and what it would accomplish. So, Casper, as we start to think about gun violence, let's start off. I'm interested to know from you, do you support red flag laws and universal background checks on a federal level?
So, no. And I'll tell you why. The red flag law we passed here in Colorado is short on due process. There's very little due process in that. In fact, if somebody reports me because they say, Casper's his posts on Facebook, have you seen that post? That's a little jacked up. And he has a gun, by the way. So they're going to come to the door, take my gun, and I have to go down to court and prove that I'm not crazy. That's not how our country works. Okay. I'm a law
and your gun is taken away.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Actually, I have to correct you. That's not what the law says. The law says that person has to go into court and prove that you are an imminent risk of hurting someone, and they have to show their evidence in court for your gun to get taken away.
You're correct. So the legal standard in Colorado, and this is what we talked about with Laura Carno.
Okay.
Do you know Laura?
Yes,
yeah,
love
Casper,
Laura.
She's
love
great.
Laura.
So we had a good conversation about this in depth.
Love her.
And Shelley is correct. The legal standard, I think it was preponderance of the evidence, which legally is, I think, stronger than some other states.
So we already have the law that says someone can have you looked at if they think that you are
a danger.
You mean
yourself.
a 72-hour mental health hold?
Yeah.
Yeah, that has nothing to do, though, with their guns.
I know it doesn't, but I'm saying we already have that. By them saying that we think Casper is a threat to himself and others, and somebody just reporting that, and now...
It's not reporting. They have to go to court and show that you're an imminent threat.
And how do they do that?
With evidence. They may have had an experience with you. You may have made
Facebook posts.
You may have written something down. These laws all over the country now have stopped multiple mass shootings because people have reported students and whatnot, school shootings where someone has posted or threatened or made a serious, it's up to the judge, but they have to show that there's a serious and imminent threat. These laws have prevented multiple mass shootings.
Which mass shootings have they prevented? You're basically proving a negative.
Because if you listen to law enforcement, there's articles on this. If you listen to law enforcement, they've said, okay, well, we took away someone's guns today who had threatened to shoot up a school. You're right. Do I have a crystal ball and know that person was going to or not? No, but I'm really glad that they were able to take away his gun before we found out.
No,
there was a guy just recently, a couple of days ago, there was a guy that had multiple weapons. He had grenades. He had body armor and stuff like that. They had a report about him. Somebody turned him in. They went to his home and he had all this stuff, and he had information that said he was about to. I think he worked for post office or something, and it was an imminent threat. Right. We don't need a red flag law to know that's an imminent threat. I mean, there was plenty of evidence that showed that this individual was a danger to himself and others. In that case, absolutely. But we don't need a new law for that. That's them doing their job. That's what they've done for decades. They've done this since beginning of time. You don't need a red flag law to know that Casper's in danger because of all this stuff. It's evidence.
We do need more laws on this. Other developed countries have more laws on this, and they have way, way fewer gun deaths than we do. The United States gun homicide rate is 25 times that of other high-income countries.
Okay, so let's focus on the bad guys.
There's another study that's posted on Red Mom Blue Mom in our Red Flag episode, where there's a review of 130 studies in 10 countries. Those studies found that legal restrictions on owning and purchasing guns tended to be followed by a drop in gun violence. So again, it's absurd how easy it is here to buy an assault rifle.
The last few shootings that we've had, there have been multiple people who have reported things that were not followed through with. You don't have to have a red flag law for that. That's just good police work. Okay. Okay, if somebody reports something, they have tip lines and all this stuff going on. But those people fell through the cracks. The guy in Dayton, I believe, he was writing stuff. There's all kinds of information.
He had kill lists and all sorts
it doesn't
of
matter if you have
stuff.
you don't need a red flag law to make sure that guy is
actually, there's nothing you can
detained.
do. I mean, I've seen it happen here in Colorado. If someone has made a threat to, I was part of a case. Someone made a threat to said, I have just purchased body armor and a semi-automatic assault rifle, and I'm going to kill these particular people. He was also mentally unstable. All of the signs. Before Colorado's red flag law, there's no way to go take away his guns. I was told by the police that there's no way.
I don't want his gun.
Even see if he had purchased
his gun. His gun is an inanimate object. Okay, if you take away his gun, then he can hop in his car and run into a crowd of people. I'm not focused on the object. I'm focused on the individual. The individual is the problem, not the object. There are a lot of people that own guns. There are millions and hundreds of millions of guns out there. The guns are not the problem. If the individual is suspect to the level that you're talking about, taking away their gun does nothing to stop the problem, because the problem is the individual.
Disagree.
Well,
it can stop a mass shooting, and I think
it stops a mass shooting, but it doesn't stop that individual from getting in their car and causing just as much damage. It doesn't stop the individual from putting together a makeshift bomb and blowing up people. It doesn't stop that individual from doing harm to other people. If they're going to cause harm to where their gun is the problem, then they can use any other thing to hurt someone.
And I know Caitlin agrees with you. We've had this discussion, but that's what I think the age-old argument that, it's not the gun, it's the person.
It is.
One thing all of these tragedies have in common.
Okay,
is
so
the gun. It is the
when
gun.
we have an epidemic of knives and bat killings, so now we're going to have a red flag law for bats and knives.
Well, why don't we see if that happens? Because
it's happening
I've grown up
in the UK right now.
I've grown up in a country where
it's happening in the UK right now. You know that, and the mayor of London and the politicians, they want to have a knife ban, a certain size. You can't have a machete. Why does the average person need a machete? Come on.
Well, the United States is the only country, Casper, where we have the number and the amount, the outstanding amount, higher than any other country in the world by far.
Absolutely.
Of gun violence, and it's because of guns.
I thought you were going to say something else. Sorry.
It's because of guns. So Caitlin's question actually puts you in a tough spot, because I don't think there's any way to please both of us at the same time on this issue, and I think it's safe to say that Caitlin won't vote for someone who is going to propose serious gun legislation, whereas after Sandy Hook and multiple mass shootings that have taken place since then, I swore I wouldn't vote for anyone who would not actively support proposed gun control, like an assault weapon ban or licensing requirements. I think the red flag laws are the most innocuous, harmless. They are full of due process. And
it's a slippery slope and dangerous, in my opinion. Now, you mentioned assault weapons, and Jason Crow has a new term now. He calls them weapons of war. They are weapons of war. He used them in Iraq and Afghanistan. Oh my God!
I've heard a lot of veterans say that.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
such nonsense.
It's nonsense. It's absolute nonsense.
Why is that nonsense?
Well, because first of all, I guess he was okay using those weapons of war to shoot brown people over there, but not over here. I mean, He's
saying that they're weapons of war and that civilians should have them.
They are
because
rifles.
Here we are, Casper. We are afraid. Our kids had a lockdown drill today at school. Let me just finish this.
Okay.
We have neighbors and friends and community members who are all affected by people dying at schools, concerts, festivals, movies, dance clubs. And this is the only place in the world where that is happening to this degree, in addition to non-mass shootings and a massive number of gun violence.
Not true.
In this country.
I can show you statistics to where we are like number 20 on the list of mass shootings and violence and all that stuff on the list.
That's absurd. Right. That's not true.
Okay, well, I can show you. I can't show you right now because I don't have it pulled up. But millions of Americans around the nation, including myself, I own weapons. Okay, they're not weapons of war. They're weapons to protect my family and myself against an intruder into my home. I don't hunt, so I'm not a hunter, but I don't own a weapon of war to protect my family. I own a rifle or a pistol. What they do is they add these terms in there to make it, oh my God, this is horrible. No, it's a rifle or a pistol, semi-automatic. We don't have automatic weapons. Some military units have automatic weapons now,
right, and there used to be those were banned at a certain point too, and I'm assuming you were okay with those being banned. The guns we're talking about here and that Jason Crow is talking about are rifles that are used in the military and that are like weapons that are used in the military.
No.
And that are designed to fire multiple times quickly with hundreds, dozens of rounds of ammunition.
Okay.
And those are the same weapons that are killing lots of people. So we can say here, I think it's a waste of time to talk about, to try to define a semi-automatic weapon that should be banned.
I don't think it's a waste of time at all.
I'd like Congress to look at it.
I don't think it's a waste of time at all.
And decide which semi-automatic weapons should be banned. But there's one thing that all these shootings have in common, and that is these type of semi-automatic rifles.
So I have to chime in here because I agree with you, Casper. I think it is very important to understand exactly what we're talking about.
Yes.
In your description just now, Shelley, about there are these weapons out there like an AR-15 or other semi-automatic rifles that can shoot multiple rounds. Incorrect. Semi-automatic rifle, semi-automatic handgun, one round in the chamber, one bullet is fired with every shot. Now, you may have a magazine. Every trigger pull, sorry. You may have a magazine, although here in Colorado, we've banned high-capacity magazines, which we can talk about as well. You may have a magazine that you can put into that gun that will provide for 5, 10 rounds. I think the max here in Colorado is 10. I may be mistaken. But this idea and this misinformation that I think many on the left, and I get it, it's an emotional issue.
Yeah.
Our kids go to the same school. They did do a lockdown drill today.
Yeah.
I've sat in one of those lockdown drills. It brings me to tears. It's scary.
Yeah.
I'm not offended by the gun ownership itself in this country. I'm offended that how easy it is to go purchase one.
No, it's not.
You can.
It's not easy. We have universal background checks in Colorado. So a background check, which every state has in the country, requires a federally licensed firearm deal. Doesn't matter if it's Walmart, Shelley's Gun Emporium. Obviously, I'm joking. Doesn't matter. Every person that buys a gun show, people always on the left talk about these gun show loopholes, internet loopholes. It's bogus. If you are a federally licensed dealer, you have to do a background check that goes into the FBI database, the NICS system, what have you. Yeah. Now that system is broken, right? We've seen that happen where records aren't shared and people that should be flagged aren't flagged. So that's a separate issue.
Sure.
What Colorado has done and some other states is actually taken it a step further to implement what the left calls universal background checks. That means it doesn't matter if you actually go to a federal licensed dealer. Even if I want to give my gun to Casper and we have some sort of arrangement, whatever that might be, either cash or something in kind, I have to do a background check on Casper as a private citizen.
I think that's the right thing because otherwise a background check is meaningless. I mean, these things we're talking about, universal background checks and red flag laws are
common sense gun right.
Well, they're actually supported by an overwhelming majority of our country.
And I'm okay
here with two people who don't agree with
them.
Well,
no. I'm okay with common sense gun regulations. I think we can take. I'm okay with having concealed carry license. Okay, I had to get a license.
But not a license for a non-concealed carry, not a license to purchase an AR-15.
You can't
Anyone should be able, you got to get a license to drive a car, you've got to get a license to do a lot of things, but you shouldn't have to get a license to purchase a weapon that can kill 50 people in
now hold on.
minutes.
So I want to come back to that because you and Jason Crow are very similar in your terminology. Okay. In the military, some military units have automatic weapons. I
understand we're talking about semi-automatic weapons.
Okay, now, a semi-automatic weapon means you pull the trigger, it fires. You pull the trigger again, it fires. My pistol, my rifle, all those things are semi-automatic weapons. They're not weapons of war, they're semi-automatic weapons. Right. The pistol is the same. I can do just as much damage with a pistol as I can a rifle. So now you want to ban pistols now because they're weapons of war?
No, I want to ban semi-automatic assault rifles.
There is no such thing.
High capacity.
There's no such thing as a semi-automatic assault rifle. A rifle is a rifle. If it shoots,
what do you mean there's no such thing?
There's no such thing.
How do you define a semi-automatic assault rifle? What does that mean to you?
Well, like you just said, one trigger pull per bullet. The ones that have been used in mass shootings have been able to hold multiple rounds of ammunition.
Okay, well,
that's pretty standard.
But so does my pistol.
Right.
So my pistol can shoot just as fast as what you're calling a semi-automatic assault rifle.
Well, I think there should be a licensing requirement for you to go buy that, and for a 19-year-old boy to go buy that.
But you're thinking
there
about
should be.
No,
is what
there
I'm
shouldn't.
saying.
Not
So
in my
Shelley,
home.
you're thinking about licensing like a driver's license, right? And that's always
Yes.
the example that's given on the
Yeah.
left, that we have to apply for a driver's license now. Taking aside the constitutionality element of that, here's the thing with a licensing structure: it creates a national gun registry. That's not constitutional. I don't think.
Yes, it is.
No, it's not.
Why is it constitutional
The
for the government to know what kind of guns I have, how many guns I have? Why is that constitutional?
Because the Second Amendment has never been found to prohibit reasonable gun restrictions. You can have a handgun in your house to protect your house. The Second Amendment has been held to provide for that. But the Second Amendment doesn't provide for an unlimited, unrestricted right to purchase guns that people on the right are saying that it does.
That's not exactly
Keep
correct.
and bear
right?
means
So-
keep and bear, and there's no number to it. There's no, okay, you can only keep and bear 10.
Well, even so, let's talk about the Heller decision, right? So Heller is the big gun decision that I know a lot of people on the right and left quote. The Heller decision held that the Second Amendment protects an individual right to possess a firearm, not handgun, firearm, unconnected with service in the militia, and to use that arm for traditionally lawful purposes such as self-defense within the home.
Right.
I am not aware of anything in Heller or anything in the Constitution that says you can only have so many guns, that says you have to have your name recorded on a national gun registry. Those things are beyond the scope of what's been decided by the Supreme Court, at least in the Heller decision around gun ownership. Do you know something different that I'm not aware of?
The Heller decision, the way I read it, and just the intro paragraph that you're looking at there, it deals with, handguns and protecting a home. So, no,
It doesn't say handguns. So.
I believe it
Decision
does.
doesn't. No. The original case was around a DC cop who was wanting to have a handgun in his home for protection. But the decision by the court was commonly used firearms.
So I would argue that decision, all it did was protect constitutionally the right to have a handgun to protect yourself. What I'm talking about is the rights of the rest of us to go to a movie theater, to go to a school, to go to a concert without worrying about being blown away, and to send our kids off to these places without worrying about it. And so
I
the
wanna
way
go
to accomplish that,
I want to go to that same place and
we've
be
never
safe as well.
And the way to accomplish that we've never tried, that we've never gotten serious because of these arguments that you two are making. We've never gotten serious about gun legislation, whether it's a registration, a licensing, a ban. I think there should be a ban on assault weapons. And what we've sacrificed with these arguments is thousands of lives, more than any other country in the world.
Not true.
By far.
Not true.
It is true.
No,
Casper.
please, you ladies are doing a fantastic job of researching and stuff. Please look that up, because that is not true.
If you look at our last episode on this issue, the red flag laws, we posted several articles online, both Caitlin and I did, to support our points. If you look at any of the charts, any of the numbers on this issue, the United States is off the charts with gun deaths compared to any other country.
So,
And it is
okay,
about the guns.
let's-
It's not about anything else.
let's
We
try
have
this.
more gun ownership than anywhere else
That's
by far
true
as well.
That part is true. That's what I was agreeing to the first time. We definitely have more gun ownership, and I am actually excited about that. Okay, but I'm not excited about anybody being harmed by a gun, a knife, a bat, a stick. Let's try this. There are many, many deaths happening in the inner city, black on black crime that happens almost every weekend in the inner city. Now, what are we doing to address that? We're not doing anything. Matter of fact, we don't even mention it. Okay, it hasn't even come up in this conversation until now. So, hold on.
Well, actually, what I'm talking about is not just mass shootings. I'm talking about the number of gun deaths in this country,
okay.
including those.
Okay. So, and if you add those in, okay, that's probably true. Now, if there was a way to remove guns from criminals, then I'd kind of be excited about that. But nobody's ever talking about that. What you want to do is take away my gun rights. Okay.
I want to make it harder to purchase guns.
I get
gun
that.
Deaths are now the second leading cause of death.
I
For
get
children
that, but
in this country.
But how do you take the guns away from criminals? They're not going to obey the law. Even if you pass that law, red flag law, whatever, you pass a law and says all guns are illegal. No more guns, period. These law-abiding citizens like myself, in order for me to operate as a law-abiding citizen, I'm going to have to give up my gun. Okay? Now, how do you take the gun away from criminals?
All you have to do is look at any number of other developed countries where they have gun restrictions,
Okay.
unlike our country,
Okay.
and you see a massively smaller number of gun deaths. It's being done everywhere else but here.
That's not what I
How do you
asked.
answer that question?
That's not what I asked. How do you take the guns away from criminals? Because in those countries you just mentioned, guess what? There's still people who get shot.
What I want to start with is making it harder to purchase a gun here.
Okay.
Or legal.
So where we should start,
Yes.
if you're concerned about gun violence and the numbers that you mentioned, right? Because the majority of the gun violence is happening from criminal to criminal. So if you're really serious about gun violence, then we should start with the criminals and then work your way to Casper after you get all the criminals away. I might even be okay with giving up my gun if all the criminals don't have guns. But right now they have way more guns than I have. And I'm not comfortable with being in my home and have my family unprotected because you aren't comfortable with me having a gun.
It's interfering on my right to go to a public place without fear.
I've never interfered on your right, Shelley. I will never
Having
interfere
a
on your
handgun
right.
in your home is not what I'm talking about. Purchasing an assault weapon with the capacity
No such
to-
thing as assault weapon.
Okay, that's a common term that a lot
I
of
know
people
it's a
use.
very common term,
meaningless.
and now it's weapons of war. He's scaring me with that. I'm really scared about those weapons of war.
Purchasing an assault weapon so easily, a young person, and the amount of ammunition that's involved in that shouldn't be so easy.
I agree.
And a lot of the
I
deaths
agree. It
you're
shouldn't be
talking
easy.
about,
It
a lot
shouldn't
of
be
the
easy.
other deaths besides mass shootings are also caused by legally purchased guns.
Well, I don't know if that's correct. So
don't think
Department
it
of
is.
Justice released a report in January of 2019 surveying prison inmates who were incarcerated with a firearm involved in a crime. More than 90% did not obtain that gun through a retail source. So the opportunity to do a background check, these folks, we have 52 people that were killed in Chicago the first weekend of June.
Yeah.
The same amount, I think, roughly as all of the mass shootings to date.
Combined.
I'm not trying to minimize
Yeah,
those,
yeah.
but it's the same number of people. And I agree with you, Casper. It feels like there is not as much outrage on what is happening in our inner cities. Those guns are not being purchased through legal means with a background check. And to Casper's point, if you can get rid of all the criminals' guns, if you can get rid of all the guns on the street, then I'm happy to talk about getting rid of my legally owned
Yep.
firearms when
Yep.
I'm a law-abiding firearm owner. But
I was
until
saying-
then, I'm not willing to sacrifice my safety for that.
I was saying shoulder to shoulder with Jason Crow or any other Democrat if they are focused on getting criminal weapons away from the criminals. I'll stand shoulder to shoulder with them. But just to say we need to get rid of all guns, well, it sounds great in theory, but in fact, you're not going to get rid of the guns from the criminals. And they're the ones I'm afraid of.
I do think we all agree, though, and I don't know what the solution is, but Shelley, I think you agree with this too, that the current system of background checks and the fact that it seems like some of our systems, our justice systems, aren't talking to each other, and they're allowing people like the Dayton shooter or others who have mental health issues,
Slip
who
through the
have
cracks.
perhaps been involved with the justice system, maybe they've been involved as a juvenile, what have you. Those systems need to be fixed.
Yeah.
That NICS system needs to be fixed. I think Trump
Yeah.
has been proposing some legislation about that. I don't know how much coverage it's gotten. I don't know the details there, but that system needs to work better because that's how we're going to prevent some of those 19, 20-year-old young men, I think, Shelley, that you're particularly worried about, and I get it. How do we make the system work so that if they are trying to purchase a gun legally, which I agree many of them do, that we're stopping that from happening? It may not ultimately stop the shooting or the violence that they're committed to doing, but that system needs to work better, I think.
Yeah. In England,
One of the ways would be red flag laws.
I don't think we need a new law. It's not a question of a new law. It's a question of enforcing the laws we have. By the way, we're not enforcing the laws we currently have. Even in Colorado, George Brockman was just on the radio a week or two ago talking about the fact there's all kinds of loopholes in the current laws that we have. We're not even enforcing those. So now you want the government to create another law, and they're not even enforcing the ones that we currently have.
It's worked all over the world. We're the only country that's engaging in this experiment. I think it's a tragedy.
Experiment meaning the Second Amendment?
Experiment meaning interpreting the Second Amendment to mean that anyone can buy any kind of gun.
We're the only
anytime.
ones that have the Second Amendment. We're the
That's
only
true.
country to have it.
Yeah, you can't buy any type
true.
of gun anytime without any restriction.
No, you
Let's
can't.
leave that as it is.
Other developed countries have more laws on this, and they have way, way fewer gun deaths than we do. The United States gun homicide rate is 25 times that of other high-income countries.
Why would we not focus on the biggest part of that problem, not the smallest part of the problem? It's like I can't think of a good example
There
right
are
now.
more guns here than people. That's
No.
the biggest.
No. I'm talking about, you said gun violence and deaths and everything else, right? In our country, it's worse than every other country on the face of the earth, right? But if you take out the 80% or 90% of the gun violence that's actually happening in the inner city, what does that percentage look like after that? So why not focus on the 80%?
Oh, I'm focused on that too. Like I say, it's the second leading cause of death amongst children in this country.
Okay, so let's focus on that. Let's focus on that. And you don't focus on that by taking away legal guns. You focus on that by taking away, if you're going to address the issue, you focus on the criminals.
And I'm not suggesting taking away guns. I'm suggesting
making it harder to get them.
Law, making it hard to get them.
Okay.
Licensing, registration, and banning the purchase and sale of stun guns.
Those guns that look really scary. Okay.
Casper, our last question today has to do with religion and gay rights.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned in your introduction that you're a Christian constitutionalist.
Mm-hmm.
Caitlin and I recently had an episode where we discussed gay rights.
Mm-hmm.
We agree that gay people should not be discriminated against.
Mm-hmm.
We differ in that as a conservative, Caitlin doesn't think that rights against discrimination are more important than religious freedom, whereas I support prohibition on discrimination over religious freedom to the extent that religion causes some people to discriminate against the LGBTQ community. Now, I know you're both a conservative and active in your church and religious pursuits, so I wanted to see where you stand on this particular red mom, blue mom disagreement.
Well, let's use a specific case to help you with this. So, Jack
Phillips.
Jack Phillips, right? So I know Jack personally. I've been to his shop, and he did not discriminate against those two gentlemen. What happened was they had been coming to that shop over and over again buying stuff. No problem. What they wanted Jack to do, because he's master. I mean, he really puts his artwork into these things. They wanted him to make a special cake for their wedding that he did not agree with. So he said no. And that's when everything all blew up. So he didn't discriminate against them for saying that because they were gay. He said, I don't want to make a cake. I don't want to make that cake. So he should have the right to not make that cake. But he never stopped them from coming into his shop and buying stuff. Now, if he said, you can't come in here because you're gay, now I got a problem with Jack. But he never did that. So I have a problem with people discriminating against gay people, or straight people, or black people, or white people, or any people. But I also believe that I should not be forced to do something that violates my religious beliefs.
How about being fired because you're gay?
Each situation is different. There should never be a blanket policy on this because there are so many different factors that go into this.
The blanket policy I'm suggesting is that gay people or the LGBTQ community be added to the list of other protected classes.
Protected classes, no.
No,
absolutely not.
Why not?
No, because they have the same rights I have as a human being. Just because you have a different sexual preference should not give you extra rights.
But how about the color of your skin?
No extra rights.
No, but I'm not talking about extra
not even
rights.
for me.
I'm
extra
talking
rights.
about the same rights. So the rights to enjoy public accommodations, to not be fired because of your race, your religion,
it's proven
your national origin.
If it's proven that they were fired because they were gay, discriminated against, I mean, come on.
Come on, what? Should it be prohibited or not?
Is that like a rampant thing that's happening across America? That's happening, gay people being
gay
fired?
People have been discriminated against, yes.
I know a lot of gay people who make a lot of money and own businesses, and they discriminate against straight people. So should it not be discriminating against straight people?
Okay, but maybe you could answer my question.
And they make a lot of money. Gay people are very well.
It's against
people.
the law to discriminate against someone, prohibit them from coming in your establishment or from offering them medical services or for firing them from a job. The Constitution has been interpreted to mean that if you're discriminated against because of your race, religion, political affiliation, national origin.
Not political affiliation. They've been discriminated against me as a Christian conservative my entire life.
But with public accommodations, the Constitution, you would agree, says that you are not to be discriminated against.
But they do it, Shelley. They do it.
My question to you is, should sexual orientation be added to that list?
I don't think so. I think it's used right now as a political tool. I think that what's happening is we have allowed the politics of it to be interjected into every aspect of our life. So right now, gays are the next victim. Now, if they get attacked and beat up on the street, there are laws that say you can't beat people up on the street. I don't care what their thing is. Now, if I have a mega hat walking down the street, guess what? I get attacked for the mega hat. If I'm black, it's probably okay. But if I put a mega hat on, that's a problem. So we don't need a special law that says Casper can walk down the street with a mega hat and not be attacked. We don't need that law. We already have laws that say you cannot be harassed. You cannot be harmed. You cannot be shot. You cannot be stabbed. You cannot be abused. We already have those laws. So we don't need any extra laws for that.
We don't have a federal law that says you can't be discriminated against, but on the basis of your sexual orientation.
And we don't need that's what I'm saying. See, they've politicized this whole thing.
Well, if you're an LGBTQ person and you've experienced a lot of discrimination, I'm sure they would, someone would disagree with you. Your argument is the same one that was made, in the civil rights movement in terms of why the civil rights laws that we're talking about were
we need laws that say
necessary.
if you want to harm Casper, you're going to jail. You cannot harm Casper. You cannot harm Shelley.
But can you discriminate against Casper? Can you be allowed to sit at the same lunch counter?
Shelley, I've been discriminated because I'm conservative. Do you understand what you're saying? Okay, so now we got to have a law that says you can't discriminate.
You'd roll back all the civil rights protections.
No, what I'm saying is that we have turned this into a debacle. This is crazy. As long as I'm a Democrat, black, I'm okay. But as soon as I become a conservative, I'm a problem.
What you're saying is it's okay to discriminate in public accommodations against someone based on their sexual orientation.
No, that's not what I'm saying. You'll never hear me say that.
Well, you're saying that.
I'm saying we have laws that protect that already.
No, we don't. Not on a federal level. Some states do.
But Shelley, you think Jack Phillips should have been forced to bake that wedding cake?
Yeah, I think that it all goes to the definition of public accommodation. Whether it's a wedding cake or the probably more problematic examples are denying medical service or denying someone a seat at a public accommodation or a hotel. The same stuff that went on in the civil rights movement, gays have been discriminated against.
And I think that's the nuance for me where I disagree is I think to answer your question around should we allow someone who is gay at work to be fired because they're gay? I think absolutely not. I think that's absolutely not okay. And it sounds like Casper agrees with that.
I agree.
What I think is interesting, and I don't know the right answer here, let's say it's a Catholic school, obviously deeply held religious beliefs, and they have someone who joins their staff and later comes out as gay. And that is in direct conflict with the core foundational teachings of that religion. That one gets a little bit stickier for me. I don't know. And that was kind of like you said in the intro.
And that's what
for me, I have a hard time. What is the priority? Anti-discrimination, which I agree, discrimination against anyone is not good.
Right.
But I also appreciate, and I'm not particularly religious, but I appreciate many people have deep held religious beliefs. When those things are in conflict, which one rises to the top? Yeah. I'm not sure. Shelley, I think you're very clear on the discrimination piece is the priority for you. But that's where I think the conversation gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Well, again, that's the same argument that was made during the civil rights movement. People thought that it was ungodly or against their religion for whites and African Americans to, marry, to sit at in the same restaurants, to integrate in schools. And people thought that was sincerely held religious belief. So no, I never think that the sincerely held religious beliefs should allow for discrimination. I always think that the anti-discrimination law should trump that. I think that our federal government, our interpretation of the Constitution should include the LGBT community in the list of protected categories in terms of discrimination.
Okay. If I as a black person walk into Jack's shop and he says, you can't buy anything in here, that's obviously a case of discrimination. But if they want him to participate, in their lifestyle. And he said, no, I don't want to do that, but you can buy stuff here. And there's plenty of gay bakers around. He's not the only baker in the world. They knew. See, they targeted Jack for months. This is where this leads to. It leads to this really bad place that we have gone to as a society. They are targeting Jack. That's the problem. It's not good. No, it's not Jack that's the problem. They're targeting him because they know that he is he has tightly held religious beliefs.
Gay marriage wasn't legal until just recently. That's just one example of, a multitude of discrimination.
And they fought for gay marriage and they won.
Right. And that's evidence that there's been a ton of discrimination against gay people. And so, your position that they shouldn't be on this list of protected classes is, in my view, very similar to the position that was taken by the owner of the lunch counter when he said, I don't have to serve anyone. This is my private restaurant.
But you're assuming
I don't have to serve anyone.
So you're assuming that the law fixes the problem. And the law never fixes the problem. The thing that
the civil rights movement made some things better.
No,
Fixed some
the law didn't.
problems.
No, it didn't. Over time, society changes. So black people are actually no better off than they were a long time ago. They're still in bondage. They're still complaining. They're still victims. There's still problems. The same problems they had in the 60s and 70s. They still got the same problems. And the law has been in place. So the law is not going to fix it. It's a mindset, right? I grew up in that.
Part of the mindset is acknowledging
I grew up in that.
discrimination, you know?
I don't care if you acknowledge me or not. I don't care if you acknowledge discrimination. It doesn't matter. It doesn't change because of their mindset. See, I'm an American citizen. My point is if I get stopped by a cop, I'm not going to say, I can't believe you stopped me because I'm blah, blah, blah. That's what I do. You better have a really good reason to stop me, okay? I'm not going to get upset. I'm going to follow instructions because I want to live. They have more guns than I have, and they can call for backup. Okay, so I'm going to let him do, her or him or do whatever they're going to do. Give me a ticket, whatever. And if they want to arrest me, I'm going to let them arrest me. And then we're going to have the fight in court. That's what Americans do. We fight it out in court, not on the street.
It sounds like you're saying that you don't think that police brutality in the African American community is a real problem.
Oh, it exists, but it's not the problem in the African. It's not the problem. It exists in all communities. If you are a very aggressive young white male, you have just as much chance of getting shot by a cop. Just as much chance.
I don't think that's true.
I know it's true.
Well, I think there are a lot of African American mothers out there who think their kids may have a higher risk of getting shot, and I think they have.
I know they do. That's my point.
They have a reason to think that.
No, yeah, they have a reason to think it because that's been drilled into them by progressive liberals. You have drilled that into their head that they are victims.
You don't think that police ever have a bias with
Of course they do.
race?
Everybody has a bias. You have a bias. I have a
know.
bias. We all have a bias.
So you don't think that bias might cause
Yes, it could.
sometimes
It
a police
could.
officer to treat someone differently because of the color of their skin?
Yes, it could. But it's not that big of a problem. It is a problem. There are bad cops. There are bad lawyers. There are a ton of bad people. But that is not a major problem in the black community. There are far more blacks being shot by gang members in the black community. In Aurora, we may have, now, I'm not saying any shooting's good. I'm just saying in Aurora, we might have 1 or 2 shootings by a cop a year. But there are dozens of shootings happening in Aurora by non-cops. But they arrest people all the time. They pull people over all the time and give them tickets. Black, white, Hispanic, whatever. They're not just targeting young blacks on the street and shooting them dead on the street just by targeting it. Yes, it's a problem, but it's not the problem. The problem is the mindset of the blacks in the community. The problem is we're teaching our youth to be victims. So naturally, when you see a cop, you're going to treat that cop like he's the enemy.
You're saying that the discrimination is not the big problem. A big problem is the mindset.
It's not the biggest problem. Discrimination is not the biggest problem. The mindset is the problem. Because if you take a black person out of the inner city, you bring them out here to Highlands Ranch or wherever, in the suburbs, they thrive and they prosper. They have homes. I mean, it's just a total switch. But if you keep them in the inner city, under that mindset, that's when they have problems.
Well, thank you so much, Casper. We wish you the very best of luck. I know the campaign is probably just starting to ramp up, and the next, 14 months or so are going to be very intense for you and others that are in the race locally and elsewhere. But we wish you the best of luck, and thank you so much for being here today.
No, thank you.
And Casper, we hit you with a lot of tough questions because Caitlin and I do that, and we're very thankful for your time.
I like tough questions. You notice I didn't dodge any of them. I answered it the only way I could.
Yeah, thanks so much, Casper. All right, thanks everybody. Thanks for listening.